I finished a sports book on the way that I'd like to tell you guys about.
Very excited. That was an experience kind of like I've told you before about my bit of watching someone watch a movie on a plane.
Okay.
No idea what Thor Ragnarok is about, but somebody 4 rows up and across the aisle is watching it.
So you'll watch it from behind them?
No audio.
Okay.
And just sort of piece it together on my own. And that's kind of what I did when you were reading that book. Whenever I was like in view of you having the book open, I would just read it as you were reading it. Yeah.
The book is called Pressure by Sam Rutigliano. So because we were going to training camp, when I'm around football, I like to get in a football state of mind. Like, do you remember, I think last year I might have read Belichick, like during, as the NFL season is heating up. I like to do that.
And you'll go on a walk listening to NFL films and...
Well, I do work out a little bit with NFL films. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
It's totally normal. Lots of people do it. But yeah, so Sam Rutigliano, I'll give you a quick book review. Sam Rutigliano was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns when I first had any tiny sports consciousness. So I don't know how old you were, but I guess it looks like 10, 11-ish when I first started to realize, something's going on in sports that everybody's talking about. And that's like my earliest memory of sports is the 1980 Cleveland Browns that should have gone and won the Super Bowl.
The first one I have was a little bit earlier than that, and it's the 1992, I think that's Pasadena, right? The Super Bowl.
Is that the first Cowboys Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Of the 90s?
Yeah. And I was 7. And it's interesting now that I think about this because I'm pretty sure my parents went to a Super Bowl party and we had a babysitter. But then the Pro Bowl was like a month later, so the party might not have gone that well now that I think about it.
Oh, that year?
Yeah, I think so.
Jake's mom told him that they were getting a divorce at halftime of the Pro Bowl.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
But you know what? It was probably for the better. They would just fought and argued, and you would have grown up in that kind of a household instead of the...
No, and the interesting thing about it is once that happened, they never argued.
Sam Rutigliano was Coach of the Year 2 years in a row in 79 and 80.
How many times has that happened?
7. Oh, I have no idea.
Doesn't it feel like that's always we can't give it twice award?
Like in modern day, perhaps, yeah.
Huh.
But I guess he took over the team, and they were really bad, but then they got kind of average, and then they really blew up in 1980, or the 1979 season. And there's a couple funny things in here. So I think in the end, I'm going to say not a good coach.
Okay.
A fine coach. Seems like a really good human.
But like when you were a kid, you thought he was a much better...
Well, yeah, you just don't know anything.
Yeah.
And you're fresh off of reading the Belichick book, so anybody compared to him is probably not very good.
He did have very progressive thoughts on the drug problems of the 80s because he started something called the Inner Circle with the Browns. And he has gotten me as close as I can come to liking Art Modell again.
Wow.
Because Art Modell was fully on board with the prevention, treatment, and very importantly, they say aftercare in their drug program. Kept it totally anonymous, despite the local paper trying to figure out who was in the drug program. But they were very, very progressive thoughts, whereas most teams would be like, if they found out you had a drug problem, they just kind of get rid of you.
Yeah.
Or if you're like a really good player, they try to figure it out. How can we just keep you being a good player? They weren't really worried about you as a human, and Sam Rutigliano does seem like he was worried about you as a human, at least in this book. One of the things, he gets a bit religious in it. You might know later he ended up being the head coach of Liberty University. I don't know if you did know that.
I did not know that.
After he was fired from the Browns.
Now, was he the one who gave the thumbs up from a hospital?
No. That was Hugh Freeze.
Oh.
But his Finding the Lord story is just something I never knew about This was early in his coaching career when he bounced around the NFL, Denver, Jets, here and there. He was driving late night with his wife and 4-year-old daughter. He fell asleep at the wheel, and the 4-year-old daughter was killed.
Oh.
And so that's got to be a tough situation to ever come out of. And, you know, sometimes religion will help you do that, and it did for him.
I think I'd probably end up going the other way.
Hit the bottle?
Well, just like give up, you know?
Yeah.
The guilt. I'm like, I am a 2-time Coach of the Year winner.
Well, he would become that.
Okay.
He did this thing early in his coaching career. What I knew him for, or what anybody in Cleveland knew him for. Again, this was before I had real sports consciousness during the late 80s, early 90s Browns. That was when they went to the AFC Championship game 3 years in a row. That's the drive with Elway or the fumble with Ernest Biner. But 3 years in a row they went to the AFC Championship, never got to the Super Bowl. But this was called Red Right 88. Have you ever heard me use that term?
I've heard it from you and from many others.
Okay, so in the 1980 playoffs, the Browns get to the playoffs for the first time in whenever, you know. I mean, Art Modell famously fired Paul Brown, who invented football. He invented a lot of stuff in football. But he fired him. They ended up winning another NFL championship with a coach named Blanton Collier after that. But it was basically like Switzer winning the Super Bowl here with Jerry's team.
Yeah.
So it was like right after the firing, they won the NFL championship, but it didn't really count. So ever since he had fired Paul Brown, they were thought of as like a laughingstock until Rutigliano came around. And so he brings them back to the playoffs. They're playing Oakland in a very, very, one of the coldest games ever. The Oakland Raiders come to Cleveland. The Oakland Raiders would go on to win the Super Bowl that year.
A little transitive property action.
So that's why it was always thought that, of course, had the Browns won this game, they would have won the Super Bowl. And it was a very low-scoring game, of course, in the very, very cold of Cleveland. Like real, I don't even know what, but you're talking about, literally 0 degrees, minus 10 or minus 30 wind chill, that kind of thing.
Can't wait.
We'll be there pretty early in the season.
That's true.
So it's first down for the Browns they're down by 2, and they're on the 13-yard line, the Oakland 13-yard line. They had just had a long drive of their own, from their own 15 to the Oakland 13.
Blake, do you know what's about to happen?
No.
So they call timeout. All they have to do is kick a field goal. However, their kicker, Don Cockroft, is the NFL's last straight-ahead kicker.
Okay.
The toe puncher.
Yeah.
Which was popularized, I think, by Hall of Famer Lou Groza of the Browns back in the 60s or 50s or whatever. He was a offensive tackle / kicker, Lou Groza. But Don Cockroft was then the last of all the straight-ahead kickers. All these newfangled foreigners are doing soccer-style kicking now.
Is this Don?
But Don Cockroft...
How is that a pro athlete?
He was at the very end of his career. In fact, if you want to, look up Don Cockroft stats. This particular year, he wasn't that great, as I remember. Or reading about it, at least. I don't really remember. I didn't watch these games game to game. But in this particular game, he had already missed an extra point and 3 field goals.
Damn. Because
it is minus 30 wind chill. The wind is blowing like crazy.
Yeah.
Tom Flores, the coach of Oakland, he won the opening kickoff, and I think back then it was always receive. we won the kickoff. Well, he did not receive. He wanted instead to think, okay, where is the windiest part of the stadium? It was the open end of the stadium where the dog pound would eventually be, right by Lake Erie. And he wanted the Browns to be heading that direction in the fourth quarter, which they were.
I just want to point one thing out real quick for our visual audience. That guy that was just on the screen, he retired at 35.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, he looked like
and
he was 44.
I don't look good at all.
I thought he
that
was
guy
like
looks 10 years older than me.
George Blanda.
Yeah, that's a probably 33-year-old man.
Yeah.
Right there. That's shocking.
He only made 62% of his kicks in 1980.
People were older back then.
They were
Older and hairier.
definitely hairier. Oh my God, that form.
He looks ridiculous.
So if they kick a field goal, the game is over. If they make the field goal.
Sure.
So the strategy was run the ball on first and third downs to keep the clock running. And what they did was instead they threw the ball. Now, the way Sam Rutigliano tells it, he says, I wanted to tell the media all the strategy, but it wouldn't have helped. I wanted to protect Brian. Brian Sipe was the quarterback. Brian Sipe was the NFL MVP in 1979. The MVP of the NFL. I wanted to protect Brian.
Never.
We lost. That's all that mattered. There was nothing wrong with the call. The problem was the interception.
That's the thing.
Brian should have never thrown the ball in the middle of the field. He should have done exactly what he was told. The play was designed to go to Dave Logan. He couldn't have been any more open. So he says he just told Brian Sipe, whatever the play was, if he's not wide open,
Throw it away.
just throw it into the stands.
Yeah.
You're at the 13-yard line. Rutigliano says, Brian Sipe didn't play it that way to the media. I had protected him in my comments. He didn't return the favor. Later that year at the Senior Bowl, Don Shula told me he was very upset with Brian's comments after the Raiders game. So apparently, Brian Sipe kind of threw Rutigliano under the bus.
What happened to the whole religious angle where he's a cool, nice guy at this point in his career?
Well, I think he is a cool, nice guy, but he's now writing this book saying, "Hey, let's get one thing straight here." So yeah, apparently Brian Sipe kind of just went out and said, "Well, I don't call the plays. Like that was the play that was called, and I made the right read and the right throw."
That's a wild story, man. His entire career is wild if you just look at his Wikipedia page.
Brian Sipe?
No.
Oh, Rutigliano?
Rutigliano, yeah.
Yeah, so
10 years in Europe. 10 years
really?
at Liberty, yeah.
He ended up going to Europe later?
Yeah.
Brian Sipe would be wooed away by the USFL in 1983. But he was nowhere near the player he was. In fact, that year he had been benched.
An MVP getting benched.
3 years later.
Still, that's crazy.
He got benched. He was flown to New York on his off day to talk about a move to possibly the New Jersey Generals of the USFL. So Brian Sipe, not that great even when he was great, but then fading, he gets benched. Who do you think was wooing him with a huge, huge contract that nobody would match in the NFL?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump signed Brian Sipe away.
I promise you that's not on this Wikipedia page.
No. But that's who ended up signing Brian Sipe.
And it's crazy. I know that it's... I don't even actually know the story as well as you do from Jeff Pearlman's book, but it is kind of funny when people will put out the meme that's just like, if they would have just let him buy the Bills.
Yeah.
Like, he would not be a part of the public lexicon in the way that he is at all.
Man,
For the Bills.
I'm watching some of this game, Sipe was 13 of 40 that game. 3 interceptions.
Keep chucking it, brother.
But yeah, that final play call was on him.
But let's throw.
Yeah.
Let's keep throwing it.
Jeez.
2 more notes that I thought were interesting about this book, and I'll end with why I'm not sure he was the best coach. But one was interesting because they were talking about how they acquired Lyle Alzado. You've heard of him, perhaps?
I've not.
Okay, he was an Oakland Raiders lineman. He would end up going on to Denver, but I think in between there, he went to the Browns. But he was a very, very good All-Pro, or at least Pro Bowl, defensive lineman. And so he says, Lyle had the ingredient every football player needs: toughness. That's contagious. You don't find it in every draft. In fact, you don't find it much at all anymore. He says now players are, this is 1984 he wrote this book.
Okay.
Now players are astute businessmen with agents and endorsements and huge salaries and incentives. They don't seem to have the singleness of purpose that players used to have. I can't blame them, but the hoopla and the big money allow them to be less hungry when they play. So every era.
No, it's the best. Like reading the New York Times baseball thing from 1918 or something, right?
Yes, every era. Fans, coaches, media are upset at how much these players are making.
They don't want it anymore.
So is this why he didn't win the big one? So when the Browns made the playoffs that year in 1979 and would end up having Red Right 88 called and, losing that game, he says they won their final game of the season. They beat Cincinnati to get into the playoffs for the first time in quite a few years. He tells his players, he gathers them around and says, "These are the moments to savor. You'll remember this day the rest of your life. Enjoy it. Get a still shot of it in your mind so you can picture it later. You're on the mountaintop now.
Oh, no.
Enjoy it because for every other peak, there's a valley. This is your moment to remember always. You did it. You won this game. You may never again have a moment as sweet as this one, so
God,
bask
why
in
is
it
this
now.
so Cleveland?
Thanks for a super win." The guys went back to celebrating, and the locker room was a noisy, happy place. But so, yes, he basically hung a mission accomplished banner up.
It's very Wade Phillips, but it's also very Cleveland to be like, this is as good as it's ever going to get.
Right. And for Rutigliano's team,
Yeah.
it absolutely was.
Don't hurt me.